The influence of Titanic knows no limitations. Hi, Scott here. It's been a while since I've done a video. If you're new here, this is my channel CineRam, where I talk about films and movies and motion pictures and things and stuff like that. If you've come over from Jim Gisriel's channel, of course you know all about his live streams, but in case you haven't, Jim does a live stream every Saturday night, and I try and jump on during the chat when I can. And a few weeks back, on the live stream, the subject of Rocky IV came up, the motion picture with Sylvester Stallone, and I commented that I had never seen it before, and Jim says to me, "Hey, Scott, how about watching that movie and making a video telling us all what you think about it?" So here I am. Before we get into that, I just want to let all of you watching know that if you have not seen Rocky IV, just as I had not a few weeks back, I'm going to be dropping heavy spoilers in this video, and so if you are planning on seeing the film and don't want all these surprises, such as they are, ruined for you, it might be best to save this video till later. Otherwise, any takers? Okay then. So a little bit about, oh, by the way, this shirt right here is from my high school. It's the closest I could get to a sports-related shirt. And I actually watched the movie probably about 3 weeks ago, but there's been some construction going on here, and so there's always been people around, not a lot of good times to make a video. But now that it's all over with, I thought maybe I'd come down here to the den and show you exactly where I watch everything that I take a look at. Over there is my flat screen, about 50 inches. There's a lamp and also a place to sit, a couch, and there's a table where you can set drinks and refreshments on. You know, whenever I'm watching a show or a film, this is where it is. I got my little camera here, which is a phone, and it doesn't have the greatest storage capacity, so unlike a lot of people these days who are doing reactions to entire films and then chopping them up and putting the highlights together for a YouTube video, I really can't do that. But that's okay, because I'd prefer not to. I don't want to have to be distracted by the presence of a camera that's recording me while I'm trying to enjoy a film. I'm supposed to be talking about the film and reacting to it and giving my opinion and screaming or laughing or what have you, and I just as soon watch the film without having to worry about all that stuff and just take a little while to talk about afterwards. I've enjoyed a lot of those videos the past few months. With a lot of people quarantining, they're catching up on films from the 80s and 90s and classics that they never got around to seeing, and some of them are pretty entertaining, especially if they're films that I'm very familiar with. I'm not able to really do that, but hey, I enjoy them, and you probably enjoy some of them as well. So anyway, Rocky. Let's see now, where to begin. There are a few films that are, you know, historically significant, I guess you could say, culturally significant, that I've never gotten around to seeing. Things like Gone with the Wind and The Maltese Falcon and some more contemporary stuff. But the original Rocky was actually on that list, and I'd never seen Rocky IV before. But I didn't have a great interest in really seeing it. It wasn't something that I was all that keen on. I did, however, figure at some point I'm going to want to see the original Rocky, and so when Jim said to me, "Hey, how about watching Rocky IV?" I thought, well, you know what, I better watch Rocky first. There's a lot of Rocky movies, actually, but prior to, you know, a month or whatever it was ago, the only Rocky films that I'd seen were Rocky III and Rocky Balboa from 2006, and Creed. Those were the only films that I'd seen in the series up till that point. So I wasn't super familiar with the character, other than the fact that I knew that he was a boxer, and that he was played, of course, by Sylvester Stallone. Didn't know that much about the films themselves, except for the basics. And if you, again, like I said, don't want to be spoiled too much about any of the Rocky movies, you're probably going to want to tune out at this point. Here's what I knew. In the first movie, Rocky loses his fight to Apollo Creed, played by Carl Weathers, but he ends up with Adrian, so it's a relatively happy ending. In the second movie, Rocky fights Apollo Creed again, and he wins. In the third movie, he fights Mr. T, and he wins. In the fourth movie, he fights Dolph Lundgren, and he wins. In the fifth movie, he might fight somebody, but I'm not really sure. Anyway, I hear that it's not that great of a movie. and probably will never get around to seeing that one. And then there are the more contemporary Rocky movies. You've got Rocky Balboa from 2006, where he's a restaurant owner and he has a match with a young guy. Like I said, that's the one that I've seen. And then there was the Creed movies, Creed and Creed 2, in which he is the mentor towards Michael B. Jordan, who plays Apollo Creed's son, Adonis Creed. But like I said, that was pretty much the extent that I knew about them. So the first Rocky movie came out in 1976, and I was mistaken in thinking that it was actually the movie that beat Star Wars to Best Picture, but actually Rocky came out a year earlier than Star Wars. It was Annie Hall that beat Star Wars to Best Picture. So I watched Rocky, which was directed by John G. Avildsen, who also directed the 80s classic The Karate Kid, the original Karate Kid with Ralph Macchio and Pat Morita. Aside from that, he also directed Rocky V, unfortunately. Not really familiar with his filmography on that. And since I wasn't terribly interested in the Rocky movies, I really wasn't that interested in who made them, who directed them. So I looked them up. Rocky II, directed by Sylvester Stallone. Rocky III, directed by Sylvester Stallone. Rocky IV, directed by Sylvester Stallone. Rocky Balboa, directed by Sylvester Stallone. I thought, wow, how about that? This certainly sheds some light on the creative direction and just sort of the motivation, I guess, behind making these films. I think, anyway. I've read that much like Tombstone, the second Rambo movie is credited to George Cosmatos, but Stallone also directed large portions of that movie as well, sort of like unofficially. Which is interesting because Rambo 2 and Rocky 4 came out the same year, if I'm not mistaken. And if we're to believe the story about Rambo, then he directed both of those movies, and they came out the same year. That's quite something. In the original Rocky, he's sort of living very simply. He's got a tiny little, ruddy little apartment, and is a fighter, basically trying to earn his way to bigger matches and making a little money from that, and also doing some muscle work for a loan shark. But then Apollo Creed, who's the heavyweight champion, he says, I want to fight, a younger guy, an upstart, someone who's an unknown, really sort of sell the idea of the American dream, not just have it be about the most elite athletes. And so he picks Rocky. He goes through a bunch of boxers and he picks Rocky, and Rocky trains, and and he trains really hard, and the guys around Apollo don't really take him all that seriously, to their disadvantage. There's this term that's used, exhibition match. I'm not really sure what exactly an exhibition match is, but I figure that a boxing match is a boxing match, and if you're not going to try and win, you're going to lose. Apollo apparently is confident enough that he really doesn't have to try all that hard to beat Rocky, to his detriment. There's a line during the climactic match where one of his support team says, like, this guy thinks it's a real match. I'm like, well, duh. He's gonna try and do his best, given that it's televised and what have you. It's a big deal. It's a big event. So they trade blows really well, and they're very well matched. In the end, Apollo's named the winner by the judges, even though none of them are knocked out. Or spend their 10 seconds on the mat, as it was. So in Rocky IV, now we jump ahead to Rocky IV, and I'm not really all that keen on seeing the second and third movies, or the third movie again, just because, it just doesn't seem all that necessary. And it turned out to really not be necessary because there's a nice little montage recap, not only of the end of Rocky III at the beginning of Rocky IV, but then they have a whole montage sequence in the middle of the movie where we flash back to multiple scenes from the previous Rocky movies. What happens in Rocky IV is there's a Russian boxer, big, scary-looking Russian boxer played by Dolph Lundgren. His name is Ivan Drago, and he comes over to the States for an exhibition match, and he wants to fight the champion, Rocky Balboa. And Rocky's like, nah, I don't need to do that. And Apollo says, well, I want to fight him, you know. I need to be able to fight guys, you know. I don't like being retired. I want to be able to show the world that I can still hack it in the boxing world. And that's a big mistake on his part because he gets killed. He fights Drago in what is supposedly an exhibition match, whatever that means. And, you know, Drago doesn't hold back. He goes full force and he wins punishingly. And it's too much for poor Carl Weathers because he dies. So now Rocky is motivated to fight the Russian. But the Russian, or at least his people anyway, say it's not safe for him here in America. You know, we're going back to Russia. You know, there are threats on Ivan's life because of the death of Apollo Creed, and so we're going back to Russia. So Rocky's like, well, how about I go to Russia too and I fight you there? And they're like, okay. So he goes to Russia and he holes up in a cabin with some of his guys, some of his support staff. Adrian, who's now his wife, she stays home, but she gets there eventually. There's like I said, there's a time jump here that I'm dealing with because I went from Rocky 1 straight to Rocky 4, and he goes from basically being this guy who gets the shot at a big match, and you know, sometime later he's now very wealthy. He lives in a big house. He drives a Ferrari. He's got a son with Adrian. But he still feels like he has to fight, and Adrian's like, maybe not such a good idea. This guy is dangerous. I've always felt, although I'd never seen the film before, I always felt that Ivan Drago was kind of like the Darth Vader of fictional boxers, you know. Really tall, scary looking, too powerful, you know, you don't want to mess with this guy. But even if you haven't been spoiled by the talk, basically, or the talk that I'm giving right now about what happens in Rocky 4. If you looked at the poster, you'd be spoiled for what the end is. The poster has Rocky's big pose at the end and actually has the freeze frame from the very last shot of the movie on the poster. And I guess I figured back when this movie came out, the people making the movie wanted to reassure their American viewers that Rocky would in fact be triumphant in the end. And so they made sure to communicate that, and so everyone was, it's kind of like Free Willy, you know. Free Willy is a movie that came out in the 90s about a dolphin that's trapped somewhere, and this kid tries to help it, go off into the ocean and live freely rather than in captivity. And they included that scene where the dolphin finally escapes in the end in the trailer. And I figured because the movie is supposed to be for kids, they wanted to assure parents that it would be a happy ending, so they feel comfortable taking their kids to see the movie without worrying about whether or not Willie would die or something like that. The whale, I mean. And I figured that's much the same thing with Rocky. They wanted the people, their target audience for the movie, to feel comfortable ahead of time knowing that Rocky would be triumphant in the end. The boxing matches, are really exciting, and they're pretty brutal and bloody for a PG movie. All these movies are rated PG, except for the Creeds, I think. I'm not sure about Rocky Balboa, but I know that 1 through 4, all those are rated PG. I don't think that the PG-13 rating came out until just before Rocky 4 came out. Anyway, Rocky trains really hard, and Ivan Drago trains really hard in his big scary machines and computers, and Rocky does it the old-fashioned way. He lifts things, he chops up wood, he runs up mountains instead of up the steps in Philadelphia like he did in the first movie. And then they fight, and Ivan Drago is somewhat surprised that Rocky is as tough and as strong as he is, and Rocky wins the match. Rocky's I think an appealing character because he remains pretty humble and hardworking throughout. He doesn't let success and his victories go to his head. Not that I've seen in the films so far. He has this line in Creed, which is really terrific. He's training with Michael B. Jordan in the gym, and he has him stand in front of the mirror and look at his reflection and says, "This is the toughest opponent right here that you're ever going to have to face. I believe that's true in the ring, and I believe that's true in life. And he's, obviously it's a philosophy that he's lived by, because he's always been the guy to never sort of feel like he's got it in the bag. He always assumes that he might lose, and so he works just as hard as he can to prevent that from happening. At the very end of the movie, when all the Russian audience that don't give a damn about Rocky Balboa, they're cheering him on because he's actually, winning against Ivan Drago, the big, scary, supposedly undefeatable Russian, who's one of their fellow countrymen. And after he wins the match, he gets on the microphone of the loudspeakers and he says, things have changed for you, for me, how I feel about you, how you feel about me, and how we feel about each other, something like that. And then he says, if I can change and you can change and everyone can change. Except that Rocky really doesn't ever really change. He's still the same humble, hardworking guy he was at the beginning of the first Rocky movie. He's got more now, but he's, fundamentally the same character. And he's, I guess you could call him an optimist, really. He's a big contrast with Stallone's other signature character, Rambo, in that he's disturbed. Rambo is disturbed and, sad and forlorn and lonely, and, he flies into a rage when pushed, whereas Rocky is much more even-tempered and controlled. When he really gets his anger boiling up, then he takes it out in his training. He beats the giant cow carcasses in the freezer. He lifts the boulders. He runs and runs and runs and gets that frustration out. And so there's something to admire about a guy with that kind of attitude. There's another character in the movie. In the movies, his name is Paulie. I think he's Adrian's brother. Yeah, no, that's right. He's Adrian's brother, and he felt like kind of a necessary character in Rocky IV. He's comes along to help with the training. I don't know why. In the first movie, he's sort of like an obstacle to Stallone and Adrian having a successful relationship. Adrian, by the way, is played by Talia Shire from the Godfather movies. I haven't really seen her in anything else beyond that. But for me, the most interesting characters in Rocky IV were Ivan Drago and his wife, who's played by Brigitte Nielsen. Ivan Drago really strikes me as a tool of propaganda for the Russian government. Look how big and strong Russians are. We have the best boxer in the world. And they train him within an inch of his life at all kinds of scary machines and tests. And, Dolph Lundgren himself is a very formidable, cat. He's like 6'5" or something like that. And I remember specifically seeing the trailer, or maybe it was the music video for Rocky IV back in the day, and seeing Ivan Drago strapped into one of these machines. It's like comes down over him, these big black things attached to his shoulders, and it basically he like sits there and like twists back and forth like that. I guess is like another exercise thing. Is a big, weird, scary looking thing, and I thought, no, that's pretty intimidating. But in the end, he makes a little change of his own, rather than just being this voiceless punching machine. Dolph Lundgren, I think, has like maybe 10 lines throughout the entire movie, and about half those lines come during that climactic match. Prior to then, we just got a couple of signature lines. There's the one, "I must break you," which he says to Rocky, and of course, prior to that, when the only thing he ever says to Apollo during their matches, "You will lose," big time. But what's interesting about them is that his wife, and I can't even be sure that she actually is his wife, because she just feels like a spokesman. They go to a press conference and he doesn't say a word. Drago doesn't say a word during the press conference. His wife and his manager do all the talking for him, and Apollo makes this crack about how maybe he left his tongue in customs or something like that. But he makes a little change. He fights differently during that last match with Rocky, because his confidence is somewhat shaken now. And I believe there's a character who's supposed to be Gorbachev watching the match. And he yells basically at the box seats there, "I fight for me now. I fight for me." And I'm just kind of curious, after the credits roll in this movie, what happens between Rocky and this woman who is supposedly his wife. Is she actually his wife? Is she just basically working for the Russian government as, again, part of the propaganda campaign? Don't know. It's kind of a mystery, but it's intriguing. I was reminded that Brigitte Nielsen actually used to be married to Sylvester Stallone. When he was doing press for Cliffhanger, somebody asked him whether or not he was scared of heights because there's a lot of mountain climbing in that movie. And he says, well, ever since my second marriage, because she's very, very tall too. Haven't seen her in a lot, but yeah, like I said, the most interesting characters to me personally were Ivan Drago and his wife. I don't even remember her name, but yeah, interesting. Not films that I am all that fond of. Rocky IV in particular is just like loaded with lots of supposedly inspirational moments. I'm not that big of a sports fan, as you probably already guessed. And I would guess that, although there are plenty of boxing movies that I think are excellent films, more so than most other sports movies. Raging Bull, $1 Million Baby, Diggstown is really good too. Some other ones that I don't remember. On the Waterfront, is that a boxing movie? I don't think it is, really. I think that Brando plays a boxer in that movie, but it's not really a boxing movie. I like Rocky. Rocky's a decent movie, but it's not something that like I said, it was one of those blind spots in my cinema history, I guess you could say, my cinema viewing history, that I'd never gotten around to. So I've knocked that off the list, and Rocky IV. Do I like the movie? Not especially, but like I said, the circumstances in which I saw this movie, there wasn't a lot of suspense about what would happen. I knew that Apollo would get killed. I knew that Rocky would go to Russia to fight Drago, and I knew that he would win. And everything beyond that is just kind of interesting details. So there you go. There's my video on Rocky IV. I hope that you enjoy it. The movie, if you see it, and I hope you enjoy this video. And there's a link below to Jim Gisreel's channel if you're one of the people watching this video that's not already familiar with him. And I'll also include a link to the latest Netflix recommendations video that he posted with myself, as it happens, as a guest. I'm going to be doing a couple more videos soon. Jim also asked me to make a video about my history with the Star Wars franchise, so I'll be getting to that soon. In the meantime, don't go to the movie theater, please. Stay home. Enjoy your streaming and your Blu-rays and what have you. Stay safe. And wear your masks when you go out. Good idea. Thanks again. See you soon.